Hey, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net. All right, turning off my computer so it is not mimicking the chat as we go. All right. So let me see if I can get the live stream up on my iPad. I've had a little bit of problems with this as of late. Let's see here. All right. The problem might also simply be that my iPad is too far away from the Wi-Fi to actually connect. And if not, I'll make do, because I usually am able to see the chat on my phone. Let's see here. All right. So, what we're doing tonight is something that I have mentioned on my channel in the past, and I try to do it. I usually should be doing it on a weekly basis, if not, well, I've been doing it like once a month, which is going through and doing corrective drawings over my figure drawing classes. And what I have up on my drawing board right now is actually an excellent example of that. Let's see here. So the drawing that's on the left, let me adjust this a little bit more so you can see a little more of it. The drawing on the left was a 15-minute pose that a model took in my figure drawing class this week. Bring the camera down a little bit lower just so it's closer to me, so you'll hopefully hear me a little better. All right. So the drawing on the left is a pose that a model took in class that I did not particularly nail. It did not come out great. I mean, it's not the worst drawing in the world, but it doesn't feel like a well-drawn figure drawing where it really describes the volume, the anatomy, the beauty of the pose, the expressiveness. Like, it's got bits and odds and ends of all of those things, but none of them were particularly well executed. While the model was on a break, I did a smaller study on the right-hand side. And this study was simply just trying to work on the structural. Because the first thing I do if hey, Delija, glad you made it for the live stream. Glad you're here. So as I was saying, just talking about some figure drawings. The drawing I did here on the right is a drawing that I did in between the model's poses when she was on a break. And usually I'll just sit there and do little studies and try to figure out what it was I did wrong during the pose. Now, again, this study doesn't feel like it even got to the heart of the problems in terms of just dealing with the structural volumes. Even this still feels like I didn't get very close to where I wanted it at all. And this is the kind of thing where if I do a drawing and then I do a study to try and figure out what I did wrong and the study doesn't come out well, then I will usually go in deeper. So this is something that I'm not sure how many drawings I'm going to do tonight. I may sit here tonight and do 3 or 4 different versions of this one. I may do 1 or 2 and get bored with it, or I may get to the heart of what I was trying to describe, and then I've got like a few other drawings that are that I also did for the same figure drawing class. And let me see, I think there was the one that I used. Oh no, this is the one I used for the thumbnail for the video. So that's what I'm going to start with this. But I've got a few different drawings up here, and odds are I doubt I'll get through all of them. I may only do like, 2 or 3 actual different poses, but I may do several drawings of those. Because my goal is to kind of like look at what I'm doing wrong and actually analyze it, break it down. If I need to go and grab one of my anatomy books, then I will do that. So this is something that I need to get back into the habit of doing at least once a week. It used to be that for every 3-hour drawing figure drawing class I took, I would usually spend at least one night a week doing an hour or so of just doing studies of my figure drawings. And I've very much fallen off of that. And true, part of that is trying to be more productive with my comic book work and putting more energy into that. but there's a continuum. It's all connected. If I spend, part of the reason why I go to figure drawing classes is because it makes my comic book work better. And if I'm spending more time doing the comic book work, while that is time spent drawing, if I'm not continuing to inform my comic book work with anatomical studies, master studies, going to museums, doing the educational aspect, then I won't grow as quickly as I'd like. And that's a challenge, is finding the time to continue to learn and grow while at the same time trying to actually produce work. So I see a comment there from Last from Mars. Thanks for chiming in. And so let's see. Would you recommend learning anatomy before doing gestures? I find that my gestures don't make sense because of my lack of anatomy. And I will tell you, the simple answer is no. I don't recommend learning anatomy before doing gesture drawing, but there's a more nuanced answer to that. Now, the general reason why I say no is because anatomy is very complex and there's a lot to learn. And if you get too lost in the anatomical muscles, you'll spend so much time trying to make figures lumpy and bumpy and trying to draw these anatomical forms, and you'll lose the overall sense of the figure. Like, let's start with this pose that I have right here. If I were to start with a gesture of this, one thing that I do that a lot of artists don't necessarily do, but I do it because I'm very bad with proportion. So remember, this is not saying do what I do, but this first way I started drawing is specifically because my proportions are bad. I start with a plumb line, which is a measurement line. And it doesn't matter how long this line is. This line, let me make it a little bit higher because I realize that the camera is angled a little too low. So let's say I'll make that the bottom of it. This line for me will represent the height of the figure. That way I know that no matter what else I add to it, this is how tall it is. And I have to make everything fit within that. So let's say generally the halfway point between the upper body and the lower body is the midpoint of the figure. So I can know right there that the legs will be down here, will be below this line, and the rest of the torso will be up above that line. And if you're doing with a figure that's 8 heads high, which is a general measure of unit. Not all figures should be eight heads high. It's just a starting point. You may decide to make someone 9 heads high if they're particularly tall. If they're short and squat, you may go 7 or 6 heads high. But I'm getting away from the point about the gesture. Once I kind of figure out my basic proportional block-ins, I'll sort of block in my torso and pelvis, and then I'll do my legs, my arms, and my head. Now, this does not describe any anatomy at all. It's just gesture. And the reason why I say that this is more important is because seeing the figure as a whole is the first step. You don't necessarily need anatomy to understand this. Like, let's say that you're going to only build a figure with spheres. I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying that if you were to choose to draw a cylinder with spheres, blocks, and cylinders. If you were to say, I'm going to build a whole figure with just these shapes, there's no anatomical knowledge here. These are primitive shapes. But you can take this figure right here and say, all right, this sphere makes the head. This cylinder makes the neck. This is a long block, but you're bending it to make the pelvis and the torso. Let's say that that's this would be sort of the hidden corner, and this is the side. Then you've got a cylinder going away from you for the legs. And just to give it a little extra sense of depth, we'll put a little break in the cylinder where the knees should be. And then you've got one that's coming towards you, another cylinder. And in fact, let's put a break in this block just to add a little more perspective to it and give you that sense of pelvis versus torso. Then another cylinder. Now, this is not anatomy. It's volume. It's primitive forms to kind of help you block in the figure. And the reason why I say that to learn this first is because it'll help you understand when you're trying to build actual anatomy. If you can't make your anatomy, like let's say the deltoid, the shoulder muscle. Now the shoulder muscle, it comes off of both the scapula, the shoulder blades, and off of the clavicle, which, since we're looking at the back of this figure, is kind of hidden from us. But it wraps around the top of that cylinder. But here's the thing, if you're just sort of drawing the shape and you don't necessarily understand that you're trying to make it conform to this overall shape of the arm, then it makes it kind of difficult for you to properly place it. Because then coming from another side, there's your latissimus, which is kind of coming from the bottom and running all the way along the back, the back muscles coming up and out across the side into the arms. These muscles kind of lean into to where the underneath where the shoulder is. Now, I'm not getting particularly detailed at all. This is still very murky, but the idea is that the more detailed you get with muscle anatomy, you always have to make sure that it continues to fit within. And when I say fit within, I don't mean that there's a box and all of the muscles have to fit within that. Some of the muscles will bulge out of the primitive form, some will cut into that primitive form, but you want it to fit within, say, the gesture or the rhythm of that overall form. So it's important to understand those primitive forms when you're doing gesture. That's kind of the big thing you're going for with gesture. And you don't have to draw them as stick straight as I do. In fact, a friend of mine recently criticized my work online. When I say criticize, I mean made a comment about the drawing, constructive criticism. Noticed something I was doing wrong and pointed it out, which is a very good thing to have friends who will do that. But your gesture drawings, you could do the same thing, but do it in much more smooth, rounded shapes, curves, something very elegant. I tend to draw very blocky, and that was the thing that my friend had commented online, is that maybe I should try and do stuff with more curves and rounded forms and think exactly like I was saying about the gesture, more about the rhythm of the whole form as opposed to being so blocky and structural. Now, I did mention, and I see Delilah that you've got another, your other comment on there. Drawing a line as a starting point is an awesome tip. I tend to find when drawing using pen and paper, I mess up sizes and have a lot of erasing. Real life doesn't have a lasso tool. Very true. Although we just spend all our time undoing in real life. Being forced to commit to drawings and being forced to deal with your mistakes on the page, sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, the whole thing with drawing a line, a measurement line at the start, that's just something that proportion continues to be a problem for me personally. So I'm always fighting that battle, and the measuring line at the beginning is kind of my first step with that. But back to gesture, and last from Mars, what he was asking about. Now, the nuanced part of this question is that I wouldn't flat out say, no, don't worry about anatomy while you're studying gesture. What you want to do is, when you're drawing gestures and you're learning gesture drawing, is really try to focus on what the figure's doing and how you're describing it. Let me see if I've got another pose here that's different. Let's see, here we go. For instance, so this drawing here on the left, on this one, the proportions are better and there's a better sense of anatomy, but it's just so unfinished that this is the reason why this one is on the stack of drawings I was going to redraw, because I just wanted to flesh it out a little bit more. There's a lot of great anatomical detail in here that I didn't capture. And that's one of the things is that also is helpful, is learning how to self-criticize, in the sense of not saying, oh, my drawings suck, but learn how to self-analyze. That's the way to phrase it. You want to learn how to self-analyze, meaning being able to simply look at a drawing and not be upset that it's a bad drawing. What you want to do is look at it and say, what is this drawing missing? What can I do to make it better? And that really is the whole point of these redraws that I do, is kind of trying to get in here and dissect it. But in terms of trying to figure out like what the figure is doing on this one, you've got a shoulder turned way back, almost to the point that, like, by the time you get to their head, like, it's not quite a front view, but it's sort of a 3/4 view. However, their lower torso is twisted in a strong contrapposto, almost turned away from us, but definitely much more of a profile view. So it's like, you know, the pelvis is a side view. You know, the tummy kind of juts out only because the upper torso is twisting so hard and so strong. And trying to convey these things, this is what the gesture's about. And then, is this leg planted firmly straight down? No, it's planted kind of out, forward more. And the foot, I'm kind of like, not quite making it up as I go along, but I didn't really get a good description of the foot in the initial drawing of the model. But it's almost like this foot is in profile, heading directly away from us, whereas the back leg is not only pressed back, but turned so that we're actually seeing the back of it's not a full back view, but it's almost like it's a 3/4 back, in the same way that the rib cage is kind of a 3/4 front. So this foot is not heading in profile. This foot is actually heading away from us in space. These are the kind of things that you're going for in the gesture. It's just trying to figure out, like, or trying to describe and show on the page, what's the body doing? And then what happens is you come in with anatomy, and the point of the anatomy is really to reinforce. It's like you're writing an essay. And you know, with essays, you start with what your main idea is, and then you go through and you discuss in that essay how you want to back up your arguments. The gesture is almost like the main idea. It's the essay. I mean, the main idea of the essay. And then the anatomy is the arguments defending that. You want your anatomy to kind of help explain or back up the things that you're trying to draw. You don't want to put anatomical details in there. Like, that's one of the things when people tell you not to copy blindly what you see, but to actually try and draw what you feel or what you're trying to say, is that if you're trying to describe that the body is at a 3/4 turn, the upper torso, and let's say that there's, the way it's lit, there's a shadow over, let's say, the tummy that doesn't describe the angle or the twist that you want. Or let's say a muscle actually fights the way that you're trying to describe it, then you leave out the things that fight against your description. You want to use anatomy, but you don't want to blindly put in every piece of anatomical detail. If everything else in your drawing is working and describing the things you want, and there's an anatomical detail that is there in the model in real life, but that anatomical detail fights what you're describing in the drawing and everything else in the drawing is working, then leave that anatomical detail out. That's fine. You don't need it. Yeah, last from Mars, I am more than happy to answer. I'm glad that was useful to you. I had more to say, and I went off on a tangent. The point being is that you also want to study anatomy simultaneously. And I don't mean you want to study anatomy simultaneously in the same drawing. While you're studying, let's say you're studying this particular, like a pose like this where a person is twisting and turning, and you look at that and you're like, I'm not really good at drawing this area of the shoulder and how the shoulder joins to the torso and how the latissimus dorsi connects with both the arm and it comes off of the rib cage and how the like how it relates to the structural parts above the shoulder muscle. You know, the clavicle and the and the shoulder blades. What you want to do is, while you're working on gesture, you may look at a lot of things you drew in those gesture drawings and go pull out an anatomy book. And you might sit down with an anatomy book and then say, all right, I am going to now just study. Let me see what I've got here. Let me grab an anatomy book. Oops. Banged into the camera there. Hopefully you're not getting seasick. This should settle down in a second. Let me adjust it slightly. So, the Atlas of Human Anatomy for the Artist by Stephen Peck. This has been what I've been using mostly over the past few years. But, you know, people ask, like, which anatomy book is the best book? I have, like, 10 different anatomy books. Not 10 different drawing books. 10 books just on anatomy. I have just a wide variety of books on different subjects. And in fact, if you're interested in, if gesture is something you're struggling with, let me see here. Where's my Walter Reed book? The Figure by Walt Reed. This one, it's the classic approach to drawing and construction. There's a lot of emphasis on gesture and on primitive, not necessarily gesture, but there's a lot of emphasis on primitive forms and primitive volumes, what you would be using in your gesture drawing. If gesture is something you struggle with, this is a good book for you, because what they really do is, or what he does, the instructor, is he gets into very primitive gestural volumes like this, and then goes more detailed throughout the book into skeletal anatomy first, and then getting into, where's the muscular anatomy? This is probably a good one for what I was just gonna talk about. Like this right here, it's a small drawing, so I'll bring it closer to the camera. But showing the muscles, first the bones of the shoulder, and then showing the major pecs in that middle drawing without the shoulder muscle on top of it, and then showing the pecs with the shoulder muscle. I might go through and draw like the bones and then draw anatomy on top of it for the shoulder. Like I had started mentioning before I grabbed the book, that if something like this is a problem area for you, this whole shoulder area, what you might do is you're doing gesture drawings, but then you'll also, aside from those gesture drawings, set aside time to look at areas that you're drawing and do anatomical studies of those areas. Say, well, what are the bones that are there? You know, your collarbone. Say the rib cage is coming off of that. Coming from behind is the shoulder blades. And the shoulder blades are going to take up a lot of space back here, but you're not really going to see that. It's kind of hidden behind the rib cage. But the shoulder blades will come out to kind of form a little bit of a tripod between the two bones of the scapula, and then the end of the collarbone will form kind of a tripod that will grasp around the upper arm, the humerus. And honestly, again, this is what I was saying in terms of anatomy. It's not about knowing the names of all these bones. I only know them because I've been taking a shit ton of figure drawing classes. What's important is that you understand the volumes and what the volumes are trying to describe. And then you would sit down with an anatomy book and try to draw what the muscles that sit on top of this are doing. You know, the pec muscles resting on the upper body. connecting to the outside, but then also coming from the top and connecting underneath on the inside. The shoulder muscles, a lot of times that's one of the reasons why this area is difficult to draw, is because the shoulder muscles kind of cover up a lot of that anatomical detail, all of the places where those muscles are coming together. And then coming from behind and off of the side of the body, like let's say the latissimus dorsi is on the back of the body, but sort of like the back coming around the side, it gets up, and then right before it tucks in underneath the shoulder, it'll jut out and into the arm. And that's why you can kind of see when people have their arms raised that it almost looks like there's these two railroad tracks or these two rods that are going up into the armpit. And one is coming from the front, it's the pecs going up, and then one coming from the back, that's the latissimus dorsi. And then mind you, all of this in here would be filled in by the bicep sitting on top. Now this isn't meant to be sort of a quick, oh, this is how you draw the arms, now go have fun with it. This is a very, very crude drawing. And it's not a drawing that I would give to somebody to say, this is something to study anatomy from. The idea is that you'd want to study gesture and anatomy simultaneously. You sit down and you do a set of gesture drawings. You go to a figure drawing class and work from a model. And you also, on your own, do anatomical studies. And you want them to inform each other. Because what starts happening over time is that what was I gonna say? What happens is over time, the basic primitive forms you make are going to, and this Walter Reed book is a good example of that, because at the start of the book, he has some very basic primitive figures that he shows you. But if you were to jump in, like, let me go pretty far into the book and see if I can find this is a really good example. When you get much farther into the book, he's still using, like if you look at this page, these are the primitive cylinders and cubes and spheres that I was talking about. But you can see here when he moves to this, these aren't just straight cylinders. He's got a nice curve to it that indicates the thickness of the upper thighs. He's got it so that the cylinders at the bottom indicate not just that it's a cylinder coming down, but the curve of the calf. That these cylinders taper to show how the waist narrows and then goes back out with the rib cage. And the cylinders get wider at the forearms and then also wider at the shoulders. And then if you move over to this page with the anatomical detail that's drawn inside these bones, then on the far side, you see that it's the same figure, but there's even more detail to it. Not just because there's lighting. The lighting definitely helps it feel more detailed. But what happens is your understanding of anatomy will inform these primitives. You'll start drawing these primitives by instinct with more anatomical detail in them. And what will happen is anatomy and gesture are not separate. It's difficult to teach both of them at the same time because gesture is very simplistic and primitive. Now, when I say primitive, I mean in terms of primitive shapes. I don't mean primitive as in it's a basic skill. It's very, very hard. Like the same way that it's hard to draw a perfect circle by hand, it is very, very hard to draw really elegant gesture drawings because there's so fewer lines that each line needs to be in the right place. That's what makes them hard. They're hard because they're simple. Anatomy is difficult for the exact opposite reason. Anatomy is difficult because it's complex. But they really are the same thing. And when you're doing figure drawing, when you're studying figure drawing as an art, the goal is that in one hand you have gesture, in the other hand you have anatomy. And the art of the figure drawing is putting them both together. You want them to be married. You want them to work hand in hand. You want them to be seamless. It's strange that we teach them that way, that we teach them in a separate way and then unify them. But and again, I haven't studied every approach to figure drawing out there. I've been working with one instructor for a long time, and the other instructors I've had tend to be a little bit more sight size, and they're more of observational drawing, meaning just looking at something, measuring it, and then copying. Whereas a lot of what I study from is constructive drawing, where you're actually trying to build it like it's a physical object. In the end, you do want these two things that are seemingly taught in a separate matter to become whole. So I see a few more questions on there, and I'm sorry I got caught up in my rant. Let me run back through and let's see here. So, Elijah, I saw, oh yeah, that you were drawing the shoulder, and the image from the book helped you a lot. Well, see, great. I'm happy to hear that. It's an excellent book. You know, I don't know how hard it is to get good art books in Australia. Maybe you can find a PDF online or something. So, because I know that ordering books and having stuff shipped on there is just murder, like on the shipping costs. But I'm glad that image from the book helped. And then last from Mars, that you're glad you asked the question. You've been looking for the answer for a long time. Well, I'm happy to help. One of the biggest things that I recommend to everybody is, regardless of what type of drawing you do, that if you can take figure drawing classes in front of a live model, that it's very worth doing. I avoided figure drawing for many, many years because I was always bad at it, and the things that came out, the things that I liked and that I was happy with the results of, were things that I drew out of my head. But I came to realize that I was always going to be bad at figure drawing if I didn't really tackle it head on. So that's when I started taking classes and stuck with it. And I found that the observational drawing and the constructive drawing from a live model informed my imaginative drawings. It was making the things in my head better. It was making the things that I made up more convincing. And when I say convincing, I don't mean photorealistic, but it just felt like it existed in a world that made sense. So let's see. And Elijah mentioning how to draw comics the Marvel way has a really good section on using simple shapes, but it also has using scribbling to form a figure, which I prefer. You know, I have seen a lot of people using the scribbling technique, and I'll tell you when I do use the scribbling technique. I use the scribbling technique when I am not sure, when I know how I want a drawing to feel, even if I don't know how I want it to look. Because usually when I'm drawing, I'm trying to convey something specific. Like for instance, with this drawing here, let's forget about the rest of the body. Let's focus just on the legs. Let's simply say, here's your pelvis. One leg's coming back, one leg's coming forward. Most of the time when I'm drawing, I'm trying to say, all right, well, here's this pelvis. What's kind of the side of that form? What would be the top, side, and bottom of that form? So I would kind of like almost divide it into a block, although in this case it would be rounded to be more like a sphere. And then with the rest of the elements, like we were talking about with the cylinders, just drawing in simple forms going away and simple forms coming towards you. Now, with the scribble, let's say that it's not that I'm trying to communicate. Let's say it's not that I'm trying to communicate this pose with the legs. Let's say that I'm trying to communicate celebration. Somebody's doing something joyful. I don't know exactly what I want them to do. Let's say I know I want them to be jumping up and down. Like what I'll do then is I try to do like shapes that are rounded and moving up and away from me, but kind of like going kind of skyward and maybe a lyrical twist to them. And then as I'm scribbling that, I may say, oh, well, it'll make sense if I have this shoulder moving back and make this a back pose. And let's say this scribble ended up putting that knee too high because it just anatomically doesn't make sense, but almost kind of have them like a pony galloping. And then let's say that I have this leg pointing down, but instead of having it be like a sharp angle, maybe have it kind of round out with the toes at the end. Try to give the legs kind of a lyrical feel. Get that ankle in there. But let's say that leg is the leg. Let's say you got to see a little bit more of the back side of it because this is the leg that's on the far side. Like we're looking at kind of, again, we're looking at a rear view, but instead of looking at that rear view of it, that's more of a static standing. You've got this twisting going on. And let's say that this leg over here is corresponding to that knee over there. Then you would have the leg up here that's closest to us on the right side. Let's say that you'll see kind of the buttocks being rounded at the bottom by that cleft that's created when a leg is coming back towards you. And then maybe have this coming more lyrically down and away. I don't need to go into too much more detail, but when it comes to scribbling versus doing structural or stick figures, most of the time when I'm drawing, it tends to be structures and stick figures because I know the pose I want and it's just me moving the anatomy into the right place. But when I'm going for a feeling and I'm just trying to figure out, I don't even know what the pose is yet, that's when I use scribbles. So I'm not really a fan of saying there's a right way or a wrong way to do anything. Because even if there's multiple approaches and only you can decide what works well for you, and what works well for you in one situation may not work well in all situations. I mean, that's why I think it's good to study a lot of different artists and artistic approaches, is so you can kind of have a lot of different weapons in your toolbox, or a lot of different tools in your toolbox. But even if you have a process that's completely different and alien from every other artist on the world, if that's what works for you and you make artwork that's compelling, that you find interesting, and that the people who view your work find compelling, it might just be that you're the first person to discover it that way and you've done something that's magical and you're unique. There's nothing wrong with that. I do believe in the fundamentals of figure drawing, but if you, and I think it's worth studying them before you reject them. You shouldn't just say, well, this is how I draw, so I'm not going to learn anything about traditional art. I do think it's worth studying the fundamentals of traditional figure drawing before you decide to go off on weird, crazy tangents. But that said, if the tangents are what ends up being unique and helping you get to where you need to get to, then that's what the path you should follow. All right, couple more questions. I got a little bit, again, ranty rant. So let's see here. Rocket in my eye. What's your opinion of those desktop figure models as reference? Do I think they're limiting? No, I do not. I think I know the ones you're talking about where it's a figure that's sort of standing upright with, that's a really shitty figure. Maybe I should get one of them. But with the arms out to the side, head upright, one side that's completely muscled, one side that's muscle without skin, or maybe you can see skeletal detail. And there's like a male and a female one. I think the people that do 3D total publishing, I believe that they're the ones who produce those. I think those things are beautiful. I love them. I want one. They're like $90 a piece, and I just don't have the spare cash to drop on one right now. I do think it's, I like them, but, oh wait, actually, hang on. I am gonna disappear from the desk for a second. I'll be right back. I do have something, oh wait, I don't need to leave my desk. I've got one right here. I've got a spare one. This one's a little bit messed up, but these little gray figures, this one's messed up because they actually, the people that made it, they put her together with two left forearms. Like this forearm, two left upper arms. Like this arm, sorry, I brought it too close to camera. This arm bends like that. This arm should bend like that, but instead bends backwards like an elbow. So they put it together wrong. But I have two male figures of these and two female figures of these, and these are not as detailed as the 3D total ones that I was talking about. The 3D total ones look like they are right out of an anatomical figure drawing book. They are great reference, and even though they're in one static pose, the thing I enjoy about them is that you can look at them and extrapolate. You look at the 3D details in this very simple upright arms out pose, but you can turn it around and look at it and say, oh wait, I'm trying to draw, let's say, I don't know, the ab muscles. Let's say here's the rib cage. Let's say here's a rib cage. And here's a pelvis. And you're looking at the rib cage. Now, in the figure, it may be completely upright like that, but you may say, all right, I want to do it with a contrapposto, a twisting, and an opposing. You may want to draw them with the hip twisting kind of towards the right and dipping down a little bit. Being able to look at that 3D figure while you draw it, you can figure out, all right, I'm going to have it, the muscles are going to have to twist this way and then pull down and then come back up. Like you're going to get this feeling of how these muscles are going to twist by looking at a 3D physical object and imagining what's going to happen when you move the pieces, and those pieces being this static figure that you were looking at. If you're looking at it like a 3D sculpture, in terms of like how it's posed, even this, I should have shown more of the hip on this side. You know, again, that's stuff that I would, if I had one of those figures in front of me, I'd be, well, I have one of these. All right, well, hell, let's do that then. If you take something like this and you twist it, this one, and also I don't like these because the neck is horrible. But, let's see. Oh, I see what you're saying. On Steam and Art Post, having the digital ones. Ah, I understand what you're saying. There are digital ones like these, and I have digital. I have an app on my computer. I mean, on my phone. There's Handy, which has hands and feet and heads, and then they have some animal skulls. And I have that on my phone, and then I have another one that's a full figure body, and I like those. I don't use them as much because, like I said, I've got a slightly better version of, wow, fail, epic fail. Well, like I said, this one was already, oh, that's not broken. It's just, it's on a peg and the peg came loose. The neck is way too long on this one. I have a female figure that's much closer to normal human anatomy. And then I have another male figure. Thing is, I've got two female figures that are a little bit janky like this one. And then I have one male figure that's a little janky like this. And then I have one male that's excellent high quality that were like the original, the SH Fig Arts. And then I have a female one. Now, when it comes to using the digital tools, I like those too. But as opposed, I realize that the time it takes to pose it in the software, even though it's not super complex, I'd much rather just pose a real physical action figure. So that's the reason why I use the physical ones more than the digital, but I don't have a problem with them. Now, but bringing it back to figure drawing for a sec, because that's kind of the theme of this this stream session is me working on my figure drawing work. One of the things that I like about what figure drawing classes help me with is that in class, you learn that when the model takes a pose, like I said, you're trying to draw you're not trying to copy what you're seeing, you're trying to draw what they're doing. It drives me nuts that I'm showing you with this broken, messed up one. Anyway, I was trying to decide whether I want to go dig in my art bag and pull out my other one, but they're in another room. I'd rather stay here with you. Um, Point being is that if I pose the model like this, and then I sit down, at this point, I try to think of it as I'm no longer looking at an action figure in this pose. I try to imagine that I'm drawing the same way I would draw a live figure from a figure drawing class. I would still start with that same process of giving myself a measuring line to figure out how much space that figure is going to take up, and then figuring out, where my pelvis is going to be, my head, my bottom of my rib cage, my shoulders. I would start with saying, all right, the upper body is turned this way, turned slightly away from me, or even more away from me, kind of 3/4 away. Then the pelvis is still angled away, but not as much. I think that the way I've got this figure posed, the shoulders should actually be the other way, with this one going up, this one coming down. One leg coming out and then down, one leg back and away. And one of the things I mentioned is I mentioned in terms of like putting down measurement lines is also for helping to figure out depth. Like I'll put like a line on the ground where the front foot is, and I know that if the other foot is back, then it's not going to touch the ground in the same place. So I'll put a little line back there to kind of tell myself to not have them on the same plane. But having this arm cutting across the upper body, the one that's closest to us, then having the arm that's away going up and away, putting the head in here. So this is me doing a gesture drawing based on this little figure. But I just sort of look at it and I treat it like I'm not copying. It's not like I copied the exact cylinder position. I just tried to look at it in terms of what is this action figure doing? And that's what I'm trying to draw. That's my gesture. I haven't even really gotten into volumes yet. Like I kind of indicate a little bit of volume in this upper arm and in the torso. But I really need to go in there and like add some roundness of the rib cage, put that line that runs down the whole body, the linea alba, put that in there. And have that line curve as the pelvis turns more towards me, more straight on. Drawing this little dip down here, kind of like her bikini line. That line, sometimes if the model is has tan lines, you can kind of see it, but otherwise that's not something you would actually draw that dip. You might draw the tone underneath there instead of a line. Like if I go in here and erase a little bit, what you might actually have is a little bit of tone underneath from the belly making that dip. You might have a little bit of tone on the underside of where your not your latissimus dorsi, the rectus, not the rectus abdominis, that's the front ones, external obliques, your side muscles. You might have a little bit of shadow where that hits the top of the pelvic bone, the top of the pelvic muscle. Have a little bit of shadow underneath there, but you won't have full-on lines. But what you would get a line from is when the leg tends to bend forward, you usually get a crease. Now that crease won't go all the way around like the leg is cut off, but you'll kind of sometimes see a crease on both sides. And that's one of those things where you can literally see that cylinder that exists, that construction concept being played out in real life if you're looking at a real figure drawing model, like a real life person. So the idea here is that I really, when it comes to using these models and these reference, all of this stuff, and I hate to keep harping on it, but it's all informed by using the figure drawing classes. Because I try to treat all the stuff that I'm doing as if I'm in class doing figure drawings. And even when I'm doing my comic book work, I'm sitting there and I'm trying to build my figures, and I'm working story first. Whether it communicates the scene that I want in the comic is really the most important thing. But as I'm doing that, I'm thinking about anatomy and proportion and volume. I'm thinking with gesture first, because that's the first thing. The gesture is kind of explaining what the figure's doing. Let me pop back and take a look at the comments in the chats there. Let's see. Mask of Restrict. Would you use the Andrew Loomis mannequins if you're studying gesture? I would totally use the Loomis mannequins. And for those of you who don't know, let me grab this one. I think I actually have close enough by that it's not a pain in the butt for me to grab it. I was wrong. I looked in my little art bookcase. It's behind me. I can't find it. But Andrew Loomis, if you were to just Google Andrew Loomis mannequin for everyone else that's wondering, Andrew Loomis has a concept that's pretty similar to the Walt Reed figure book, in the sense that this basic structural figure, what he calls a mannequin, is a structured simple volume figure that he uses to build things. And the thing that's really different about his is that in the shoulder area, it's got sort of a cape. Like, imagine if you took Superman's cape, or not Superman, Batman's cape. Like, let's say a cape that went across the entire upper part. It very well describes the collarbone and how it lays across there, and the shoulder muscles, not the shoulder muscles, the trapezius muscles, and how the neck fits into the upper body. Other than that, it's not too different from this figure, but it's probably closer to that female figure that I was showing you a little bit earlier. See if I can find her again. Where is that female? Yeah, this one. It's probably closer to this. Like, if you were to get rid of the tone, but you added more of the anatomical description that this one has, Loomis's mannequin is an excellent way to an excellent concept to use when you're building gesture. But for me, it really is as simple as, just, in a way, I almost start two-dimensional and go three-dimensional with the gesture, in the sense that, like, if I'm drawing a torso, let's grab another drawing here. Let's say that this figure from the back, yeah, the proportions are all horrible and way off on that one. But let's say that I was starting with her, and I would almost say, all right, the shoulders are kind of upright, the back is kind of arching first away and then towards us, and then down. Like, I would almost start with sort of a flat, this kind of serpentine S shape, rounding out the bottom where the buttocks are, the bottom of the pelvis. Kind of like conceptually put like a soft, even this is too hard of a line. I have to put it there so you guys can see it. Also, it's because I just drew the line too hard. But realistically, I would draw this super lightly, just so I kind of like have a good sense of where the pelvis starts, and then have a sense of where the back muscles are going in, so I can kind of describe and flesh out the way the back muscles feed into the rib cage. But let's say I started with something simple like that, and with arms coming down, and let's just, for time's sake, speed up and just say, all right, pelvis, back of the head. This is still very two-dimensional, really. This is almost like a flat cartoon drawing. Then I would start going in and trying to add in the three-dimensional volumes drawing through. This is where you get like the Loomis mannequin, or what we saw in the Walt Reed book, drawing through the figure, drawing it like you're drawing an object made of glass. You know, have that little tail shape that's made by the where the tailbone cuts into the pelvis, just above the cleft of the buttocks. And I made this rib cage too narrow because this should be a little bit more on that side. Yeah, so using a Loomis's mannequin is a great way conceptually to do that, but I tend to start not necessarily with Loomis's mannequin, but almost like just a very simple flat stick figure, and then I add volume to that as I go, and that's a personal choice. This is, again, studying from multiple, you know, I said I've got a ton of different anatomy books, drawing books, and studying the approach of a lot of different instructors. Like I look at a lot of George Bridgman. Bridgman's book is one that I actually keep in my bag that I take to figure drawing class. So sometimes in between poses while the model's taking a break, if I really like just totally screwed up a drawing, I'm like, what went wrong? I have no idea why this is so horrible. And I realize that there's an anatomical problem, a concept that I don't understand. I'll go pull out an anatomy book, usually the Bridgman book, and study that in class, because that gets into a lot of the basic structural elements. So let's see. And Elijah mentioning Steam has Art Pose Pro for $20. Not sure how powerful it is, but much cheaper than Daz or Poser Pro. Yeah, that's a really good deal. Let me, you know what? I will try to remember to leave in my comments what the other apps are that I'm using for reference, because I don't remember. Again, I've been using these drawing figures, and I think I've got some videos on my YouTube channel. Like if you look through the comic book ones, you'll see some pictures of me using mannequins for reference. I'll try to remember to put that in the channel, the description for this video as well, a link to one of my videos where I show you myself using reference. And if you want to see more of that, like on my my Instagram and on my newsletter, if you go to my newsletter, jeremy.net, that one will, I post a lot of my work in progress work, so you can kind of see how I'm building these building in my comic book page, how I'm using the anatomy reference, how I'm using physical mannequins to draw these gestures. So let's see. Oh, what do you know? I was trying to watch this on my my iPad, and for a little while it went down, but now the chat is up on the iPad. And Ion Rocks 9 just popped in. Hey, how you doing, man? Good to see you. I'm just sitting here doing some figure drawing, sharing it with folks. And let's see, Rocket in My Eye, you found the handy art reference tool in the App Store. Yeah, that's it. And I can't remember if the app is free or whether it's like a $5 app. They have more models inside there that you can unlock, but even the basic version still is pretty useful for hands and feet. And again, it's not just the static. Yeah, there you go, $2.99. That's a pretty good price for what you get in there, because you can change the lighting, and you can change the position of the hands and feet and the head models, and you can actually change details in them. With the hands, you can pose it like Poser. So that basic app unto itself, oh, even better, $1.99. That's a good deal. Great. I hope that you find it useful. I've been using, because I'll tell you, these little gray figures, I like them for having them in my in my actual like art bag for when I'm working on my comics. But these things, they started out selling them for like, I think they started out $20 a piece, then they were hard to find, and they went up to like $40. And And I think I paid like $30 a piece for my original male and female figures. Then for a while, when they weren't making new ones and everyone was sold out, they were charging like $80 a piece. And these are small figures. I mean, you can see the size of my hand. These are like the size of a G.I. Joe. These aren't like the really nice tall ones that are $100 a piece. These are like little tiny ones. But now they're back to being in stock, and there's other people making knockoffs of them, and they're back to being reasonable in sort of the $20 to $30 range. But if you compare that to a digital posable figure that you can have on your phone or your mobile device anywhere you go, and it gives you a lot more versatility and more body types. I think it's a luxury that I'm able to afford to have multiple versions of these. And in fact, if I didn't buy any of these, I could have bought the static gray one that I'm talking about with all of the very detailed anatomy on it. But I think I'd rather have the simple, several of the simple ones. Because the whole reason why I bought multiples, because I realized that if I just had a male and a female figure, I'm like, well, what if I have fight scenes? What if I have other things going on? Like, what if I got a fight scene between two women, two men, which I'm going to have in a comic book? So that's when I realized I needed to get multiples of each of them. But yeah, the digital resources are great to have. So let's see, and Ion Rocks 9, you mentioned you ordered the 2018 sketchbook. I assume you mean the Kim Jong-yi sketchbook. He was actually out in LA last year, I think, giving talks at Center Stage Gallery. And I very much wanted to go, but I did not go because I needed to get work done. And that's one of the things, like that discipline. Sometimes I feel like I'm cutting myself short because I mentioned how important it is for me to study. And like I'm studying anatomy here right now in front of you guys and going to figure drawing classes. And going to see someone like Kim Jong-yi lecture is part of that type of thing. I should be going and studying and doing that. But at the same time, I cut out a lot of other extracurricular study so that I can make time to actually get comic books done. Because if I produce my comic books at a much slower rate than I would like. I mean, obviously, I don't think it's realistic to be able to do a monthly comic while I'm holding down a day job. There's some artists that could draw that fast. I'm nowhere near that fast. But I realized that I'm not making as much time for other things. Like I kind of was talking to my wife today about wanting to try and get back to visiting museums once a month or going to art galleries that have new openings of artists that I'm into. Those are things that I think inform an artist's work and creative development, and that's something, specifically museum trips, that I really have fallen off on. I used to go to an art gallery like once a month, go to an opening, and I've really fallen off of that in the past few years. So I want to get back to that. All right, so let's see. Before I dive into this figure drawing, let me just make sure. Oh, wow. Khalil just jumped in and said his friend went to G's live class. And for those of you who don't know Kim Jong-ji, he is he a Chinese or Korean artist? I believe he's Korean. And hey, Khalil, great to see you too. I'm glad you stopped by to join me. The guy, Kim Jong-yi, is a genius artist. Like he's one of those guys who he blends both the skill with that magic. Like, you know how when people that don't draw look at artwork and they're like, oh my God, it looks like magic. I could never draw anything. And if you draw, you know that it's hard and you're like, I can't do what they're doing, but I understand that it's not magic. I understand how they do it. Kim Jong-yi is a guy who makes it look like magic. You understand that he just has a great understanding of volume and proportion. He's able to plan out his compositions in such a way that he can build extremely complex compositions. And even though he draws great anatomy, it's his compositions that blow you away. So he'll do these massive multi-figure pieces, and they're just stunning and beautiful. And he's definitely somebody that I should have gone to see when I had the chance. I didn't. He does continue to come back to the United States to lecture. He lectures all over the world. And I will probably make it a point when he comes next time to not be so stubborn about getting my personal work done. I think I was so stubborn because I actually ended up going an entire year last year without getting one new issue published. I had been working on a new issue of my comic book Morningstar, but I hadn't finished one and published it. And that really bothered me that I went an entire year without publishing a new comic book. Because my goal has always been to try and publish quarterly, one issue every 3 months. And I have never gotten close to that. But usually I've been able to get like 1 or 2 issues out every year. And so a year where I didn't publish a single book, and true, I had a new comic done early in the following year because I'd been working on it all year, but it was a big blow to my ego, and it made me realize that I was chasing too many different dragons, and I really needed to just buckle down. So, yeah, it's hard to balance everything we want to do. Korean, yes, everyone's chiming in. He's a Korean artist. Yes, Kim Jung-yi. Master, brilliant artist. If you don't know his work, then check him out. He has a YouTube channel, as a fact. It's Super Annie, I believe, ANI, Super Annie, and you can watch him do that. I mean, feel free to hang out here till I'm done. But when you're done here with me, go check his work out. So right here, I'm putting in probably too many scratchy lines, but I'm trying to work on just the basic volumes of this figure right here. And I feel like this pelvis is not getting the just due that it has, because it's interesting when you have a model that is slender but still has curves to them, because you're trying to find ways to properly convey, like, you don't want them to look like stick skinny, like some sort of like, you know, European fashion model, but at the same time, you're trying to respect the fact that this is somebody who is lean and slender. And I try to not make my figure drawing in general look kind of stick thin models. I prefer drawing women that have curves and that have muscles and have roundness and form to them. So I actually probably have more trouble drawing really skinny women than I do normal proportioned women, because I spend time in figure drawing classes looking at, like, a lot of the models we have are not like fashion models. They are normal everyday human people, or they're people who they are in really good shape, but they're not stick skinny. You know, they have normal curves. So when I'm drawing someone that's slender, I probably have a bad habit of just making them still probably too bulky. And that was one of the things I realized as I was looking at this, that there's a roundness in the middle of the figure that goes into, like, I think it's because she had a very narrow waist, but she had strong hips. I'm trying to think now, because I'm trying to remember back, because this model, I think I drew her probably, if this isn't last week, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So, and yeah, a lot of times when I'm trying to do these studies, and I'm just trying to work out details, I may end up just drawing, kneecaps or just legs or what have you. Indigo Born popped in, and yeah, some people are naturally thinner, and to them, that is normal. That's very true. Everyone's own body is their normal. I probably what I should have said was the mean or the average, what we tend to see. And to be fair, I live in the United States. Americans eat too much. We tend to have larger body types. And I think that, if anything, I tend to be more sensitive to not trying to, like, I try to be supportive of that body shape, as opposed to only in the sense that, like, everyone being told, well, let's be real, telling women that they need to be skinnier and thinner leads to, like, an unhealthy culture of having women starving themselves and developing, like, body dysmorphia and eating disorders. And I think the important thing for everyone is that they're healthy. Whether you are very skinny, very large, rounded, muscular, whatever your body type is, as long as you eat a balanced diet and you get enough exercise, your heart is getting exercise and you're strong, you know, your body type should be whatever your body type is. And I don't want anyone to feel any type of body shaming coming from the work that I do. Um, but yeah, everybody's got their own normal. Now we're getting into one of my trouble areas. And this is one of the things where I would probably go and break out an anatomy book. But I always have trouble with the folded leg because there's a lot of compression going on. There's a strong compression of the area right around and below the knee where the muscles are compressing. You get the calf pressing back against the upper part of the thigh. And trying to get that with just line and very simple tones takes a lot of subtlety. And also, I'm putting some lines on here, some cross contour lines. These aren't necessarily something I would use in a figure drawing, but I realized that I wasn't getting as much of the foreshortening that's happening here. So these lines are really for me because, like I said, these studies are not about me trying to fix this figure drawing. It's about me trying to figure out why I didn't do a good job of this figure drawing. So I'm usually trying to figure out the volumes and the anatomical mistakes that I made as I did these. And so a lot of this is trying to figure out a lot of compression in this thing, particularly when you're dealing with these folded knees. This is something that I always tend to have trouble with. And my whole thing is, if I have something that I'm bad at, I try to double down and focus on it. Realistically, I should be doing something like just drawing folded knees. Like once a week, I should sit down and do it for an hour. Or maybe just like 5 minutes every day. But come in and just study these things that I'm bad at. One of the things that I'm actually trying to do instead, and I have not been good at it, I haven't been staying on top of it. But what I want to do is take my sort of list of things that I'm bad at and keep that list with my comic book drawing gear. Because I have my comic book drawing gear kind of in my art bag so that when I'm on my breaks at work, I can break it out and work on it. And what I'm trying to do, or what I tell myself I should be doing, is taking the things that I have difficulty with, the things I'm bad at drawing, the things I struggle with, and put more of them in my comic book, because that will force me to get better at them. I'll be drawing them all the time because the comic book, that's the thing that I show up for. Like if there's nothing else that I do come hell or high water, there's two things. I never miss my figure drawing class once a week, and I always try to work on my comic book at least once a day, usually for an hour. But, you know, if I can get in more than that, great. If not, you know, well, I will try again the next day. But if I put things like poses with foreshortened and folded knees in my comic book more, it'll force me to practice these things as I'm also making progress on this project. So I probably need to sit down and make a formal list of anatomical details that I need to work on. And doing this, what I'm doing right here, this striping of the figure, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the idea of cross contour, but cross contour is, well, you know, a contour line is the line that's running along the outside of a figure. The cross contour is a line that goes counter to that or across it. So let's say that I'm drawing a cylinder. Very simple. Here's the bottom of the cylinder. We're looking up at it because it's above us. So the contour lines are the outside lines. The cross contour is a line that goes across the form. So it helps reinforce the fact that this shape, this cylinder, is rounded like that. It's like if you were to segment it. Now, by the same token, let's say that this was a bicep muscle, or let's just quickly draw a upper arm. You've got an upper arm and a shoulder. So let's say here's your bicep, here's your deltoid. Now looking at kind of the side, you can kind of see the triceps from underneath. And let's say that you've got a little bit of latissimus dorsi tucking in there. And you've got the pectoralis muscles tucking in. So these very simple, kind of coming back to what we started with before. But now, let's say that I blocked these in and I'm all, oh, I don't really have a good sense of these forms. Let's say that with the bicep, we've got, here is the curving top, and then the bicep curves down in a tiny bit. And you just repeat that coming down. Let's say it gets a little bit smaller as it gets closer to the deltoid. It almost goes in and just sort of disappears in that corner, coming down the rest of the way. Now, at this point, you would have, I'm not going to go into drawing the rest of the lower arm, but you would have sort of the, I forget the name of the extensor muscles that come out on the top of the forearm. But the forearm becomes bulkier around here. See, I don't know the names of all the muscles. As much as I was talking about anatomy earlier, like I don't know the name of all those muscles. I think they're the brachialis muscles. Either that or the brachialis muscles are the ones that are kind of underneath here, that kind of go underneath the bicep. I don't remember. Again, that's why it's good for you to do your own anatomy studies. You can't just trust any wacko on the internet saying what muscles are called. I could be making up stuff out of my ass. You got to get an anatomy book and do some research. Now, the same thing with the triceps that you're kind of seeing from the side, even though they're on the back of the arm. You kind of see you're seeing the side of it. They come back out from where the bicep curves. Almost like if you look at Colossus in the X-Men and how he's got those lines running along his whole body. And that's one of the things that makes Colossus kind of easier to draw in a comic book, because he's covered with cross contours. And with the deltoid muscles, the whole point of the cross contour is that they're a concept to help you understand what the anatomy is actually doing. See here. Now these, I tend to draw them not really as cross contours, but the way that, the way that the muscles tucking in underneath the bicep and the shoulder, they almost seem like they're kind of flaring, because that's kind of what the pec muscles do, is they kind of like flare out into the chest. They reach, even though it's the chest, even though the muscles are reaching out this way from the chest, like if this is your chest and they're reaching out to the arm to grasp it, in a way I almost draw them kind of the opposite, because the point where they're attaching, I kind of draw them flaring out this way and reaching in to grab onto the rib cage. What they're structurally doing is the opposite, but a lot of times when I'm drawing a point like this, I'll almost draw it like they're reaching in this way instead of coming out that way, which is what they're really doing. And this is one of those things that mentally you kind of have to think about, well, what is it that I'm trying to convey, and what is it that will mentally get me there? Because sometimes you'll think of something like thinking of the pelvis. You can think of it as a box. You can think of it as a sphere. There's all kinds of different ways you could conceive of it mentally when you're trying to draw the basic structure. But you have to figure out, well, what's going to explain what you're trying to convey in the drawing. So, sorry, I heard one of my cats doing something that I don't think they're supposed to be doing. She's trying to get in the closet. Um, Trying to get her R. Kelly on. She's trapped in the closet. Um, yeah, so cross contour. That's what I was doing down here with these thighs, because I just want to try and understand better the foreshortening and the volume that's going on here. So it's just a conceptual tool for me to study the volume and the anatomy and try to get them to work together. Like I was saying very early on, the whole idea is you want the gesture and the anatomy to work together. It's not a one or the other. You want them to you want the anatomy to back up or reinforce the arguments you're laying down with the gesture. And that's kind of what I was going for. Let's see here. All right, so we've been going for about 80 minutes now. I'll probably draw for another 5 minutes, maybe 10. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask. After that, I'm gonna pack it in for the evening. I've got some artwork I have to pack. Some people ordered some prints from my website, which I'm very grateful for. And I need to go and pack those so I can ship them on Monday. But something that I will leave you with. I'm not the greatest at using subtle tone for doing shading. It's one of the things that I'm constantly trying to, there's so many things I'm trying to work at. But in my, not in the most recent comic book class I'm taking, but in the most recent session, like the session before the summer session I'm in now, in the spring session, I kind of had a realization, and cross contour relates to that. And let me see, I should probably just grab a new fresh sheet to show you. So let's say this thigh that I've got right here. Let me grab a sharper pencil. Okay. So let's say that I was drawing this thigh, and the knee is mostly coming at me. So a lot of foreshortening going on here. It's coming towards me, and then the bottom leg is going away from me. Now, I showed you that previous drawing where I did a lot of cross contour. And then doing some more cross contour of it going away. And what I wanted to leave you with was an idea that if you're looking at doing shading on a figure and you're trying to do something that's not necessarily even photorealistic, but you're trying to work on your rendering, I'm really bad at rendering. That's one of the reasons why I like working in pen and ink. I don't really have to render. I just do like the strong, bold strokes that make up the figure and the structure. I'm operating much more on a gesture and volume level than I am on actual doing rendering lighting. But it is something that I respect and I know that I could be better at, and I try to practice. One of the things I realized was that if you were to say, because one of the things about drawing with tone is, like, I know people in my figure drawing class that really struggle with drawing drawing with tone, but one of the things that I see is, like, people, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. People in class will be trying to describe volume and they're trying to do everything in line, and they'll just draw, you know, let's say a cube. And one of the things I mentioned to somebody that was sitting next to me is, like, what if you were to try to draw that cube with no lines? They're like, well, how do you draw a cube with no lines? And I'm like, well, if you were to take what makes that side panel and you did that with just tone, and then you did the front panel, and let's say that this side's a little bit darker, and then let's say maybe back here it's a really light tone. So they're cubes. They're two cubes. You know, same structure basically, but one is drawn with lines, one's drawn with tones. All that I think, when I try to think of that, I think that a line is just a dark and narrow tone. A tone is just a broad, light line. They're two ends of the same spectrum. Because all it is, let me grab a book. Wow, I'm about to mess up everything on my desk. Okay. So, if you're looking at the edge of that book, that's a line. Right up here, that edge, that's a line. But the more you turn it and the more you see it, the more you see that a line is just the edge of a plane. And the more that that plane is facing you or facing the light, the more it becomes a tone until it becomes a flat object or conceptually a plain white object. Now, what all this wraps into, what I was going to say here in this final thoughts about cross contour and rendering, is that I started realizing, well, what if I were to take all of these contour lines and these lines that I'm using and wrapping them around this figure, and what if I said, okay, I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of using, and this is going to be real shabby because I'm drawing it quickly, and I do think it's something that it takes time and patience to do, or you just have to develop enough skill that you've mastered drawing it quickly, which I have not yet because it's still a basic skill that I'm battling and working to develop. But let's say that I'm going to draw that exact same shape, and I even put in a couple of cross contour lines as a guideline to help me start. But then my goal is, instead of drawing it with multiple cross contour lines, I'm doing it with basically progressively lighter and lighter tones. So I'm still doing almost like I'm drawing the cross contour lines, but it's just tone. That's it. I am converting the same concept to that. And I started realizing that that might be a road towards helping me become better at rendering. And I don't want to render for rendering's sake. What I want, because I don't believe in detail for detail's sake. I believe that you put detail in when it describes the things that you're trying to describe. And it's finding that nice balance of lights and darks and having those contours there so that they, it doesn't mean that you never use line if you're doing a lot of contour work. It just means that you're picking your spots of where you're putting your lines. And it doesn't mean that every single piece of it has to be covered with tone. It just means that you have to find out how to place the tone so that it will describe what you're trying to say. And in this simple sense, this isn't necessarily lighting where it's direct lighting where it's observable, like there's a lamp over here or the sun. This is just a very simple conceptual idea, but it's using the cross axis, or the concept of the cross axis, as an idea of where to place your tones. And this is something that's new for me. I don't think that I've perfected this idea yet. I don't think I've perfected the execution of it. It's something that I need to practice a lot more with. That's one of the other downsides of not doing enough figure work outside of class, is that I'm not working with the ideas in class on my own. And that's something that you need to do for anything that you're studying, is you gotta take those ideas and work with it. I've mentioned before, I take classes with Carl Ganas at the Animation Guild. And for years, he told us, you know, you gotta study these things. You can't just come in here, do class, and expect. I mean, you'll learn and you'll grow, but you won't necessarily grow as fast as you'd like to if you don't work with the ideas. And there was a time a couple of years ago where I was able to work out in my schedule time to. I had time not just to work on my comic, but as well, I would spend usually like an hour a day also doing figure studies. And I just had this list of things that I was bad at drawing, and I would just work on that list. I would draw animals. I would work on gesture. I would work on drawing lightly. I would work on, like, I had a list of like different anatomical areas that I was bad at. I would work on heads. There's a class that Carl Ganas teaches on heads, hands, and feet, and I would go through and just study and focus on the things that he teaches in there. I would just go through everything I'm bad at and say, all right, I'm going to work on these things. Because it doesn't do you any good to say, oh, I suck at this. What is useful, what is beneficial to you, and what will help you is confronting your weaknesses and saying, how can I learn to improve at this? Now, I went darker with the cross contour lines of this bottom part. But as you see, as I'm going in here with this tone and I'm kind of drawing over them, at a certain point, it's not even really messing up the drawing that I put those contour lines in there. I can kind of like smudge them out a little bit with an eraser. And come back in a little bit. Yeah, I should probably take out a little bit more. So I'm kind of doing the same shapes that I was doing when I was doing the cross contour, but I'm doing it with tone, and it's like I'm sculpting the drawing. And that is something that, like I said, this isn't, I think, the best execution of that concept. If you wanted to say, oh wow, he just showed me a new thing, I want to make all my drawings look like that, I don't think that this is that for this idea of using the cross contour to sculpt. But like I say, the whole point of my channel is that it's not about tutorials per se. It's about sharing the journey that I'm on as I'm experimenting and learning and growing. And hopefully there's things that I try or that you'll see me trying or struggling with, and you're still like, oh, I'm learning something from his mistakes, or I'm learning something from the battles that he's fighting. It's almost like I want to draw badly so you don't have to. That hopefully gets a chuckle out of you. So, all right, we've been on here for a good while. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me for the stream. And Delijah, I'm glad I was finally able to do one where we had time to get on here. If you guys have any questions later on, feel free to leave them in the comments on the channel. Leave them on the comments for the video. I try to respond to everyone within a day or so. And, you know, thank you so much for joining.